Hey everybody, it's Shaman Sister Sin, and you're listening to the Meditations and More podcast brought to you by littleshaman.org. That's me, Little Shaman. Today I wanted to talk to you about what role spoiling and overindulgence can play in narcissistic development. This is something that a lot of people maybe don't necessarily understand, so I thought we could address it on the show today. When people think of abuse, they usually think of physical abuse, like at least initially. If you say abuse, many people picture hitting, kicking, pushing, shoving. Most people know about emotional abuse as well, such as manipulation and verbal abuse, such as calling names or putting somebody down. Everyone understands sexual abuse as well. Most of the associations we have with the word abuse are negative. They have to do with hurting or upsetting somebody. But what about things that are not as overt? What about the abuser that controls everything or manipulates because they're just trying to help? Most people would agree that those things are still abuse, right? However, people sometimes have a hard time accepting or understanding that spoiling or overindulging a child is abuse too, and this is because it doesn't seem harmful on the face of things. In fact, it seems like the parent is doing something nice. We could call that passive abuse. While many forms of abuse can be termed aggressive because they involve blatantly abusive things like hitting and kicking and punching, screaming, and other violent or abusive actions, passive abuse is different because it involves inaction or things that don't look like abuse. For example, let's say you have a dog and the dog begs for food all the time, and so you give the dog food all the time because you want to make him happy, and he ends up being really, really overweight. That is a form of passive abuse. You're not intending to hurt him, but you are. Your actions are causing your dog to be overweight, which is not healthy for him. Even those who can see how spoiling creates entitlement and things like that might not realize the other damage that it often does. The truth is, though, spoiling can create much the same outcome as neglect. Spoiling children can cripple them. There's a reason it's called spoiling. If something is spoiled, it's ruined. When a child is not allowed to do things for themselves, when they're not able to witness themselves mastering the world, mastering themselves, mastering their emotions, when they don't learn how to do these things, it can disrupt and damage their self-worth, their concept of themselves. They can have serious trouble relying on themselves or trusting themselves. They may not learn how to succeed, and perhaps more importantly, they don't learn how to fail. Children need to learn that you don't always get what you want, because through learning that, they learn that not getting what you want is not the end of the world. They need to learn patience, how to tolerate frustration, how to soothe themselves. They need to learn coping skills and how to handle life on their own. They have to learn to rely on themselves, trust themselves, solve their own problems, and create their own success. Spoiling children can seriously damage their ability to do these things. It's often just as damaging as doing nothing for them because either way, they're not learning what they need to learn in order to be healthy, functioning adults. If you carried your child until they were 5, they would never learn how to walk. Physically, they would not have developed the muscular strength necessary to walk, and possibly worse, they would not understand why they're no longer being carried. They might feel betrayed and rejected by your perceived abandonment. They may not understand, why are you not helping me? They may feel lost, overwhelmed, and unable to understand how to get things for themselves because they don't know how to walk and they don't understand why they need to. It is scary when a child starts taking their first steps, but we don't prevent them from doing so. We allow it even though we know they're going to fall because we know they need to learn to walk. The bumps and the bruises that they might sustain from this are considered not just necessary, but insignificant when compared to the importance of learning how to walk. It's the same with all these other things. They're no less important, and people without these skills are often seriously handicapped by that as adults. Spoiling can contribute specifically to narcissism in a huge way, especially because it often is just one part of a complex and abusive environment that the child is part of. In the narcissistic family dynamic of the golden child and the scapegoat, for example, where one child is favored and the other is targeted, we see that even though one child is spoiled and the other is persecuted, both are still abused. Both exist in the same abusive environment. Both are subjected to the same mental and emotional pressure to submit to the parent's identity and give up their own. Both are subjected to the same lack of boundaries, lack of respect, lack of validation. Both become trauma bonded and enmeshed with the parent. Both end up with similar problems with their self-esteem, self-worth. The assumption is always that if someone is not screamed at, beaten, or belittled, they haven't been abused. But we have found that this is just not the case. Spoiling often occurs in tandem with emotional neglect, which means that the child may have been given material things or have been capitulated to, which means, that they were given into, but their emotional needs are not actually being met. Boundaries are not enforced, rules are not enforced, and there are no consequences for the child's behavior. This is just as bad as ignoring them completely. Children need somebody to stand up and say no. They crave structure even though they buck up against it. Without structure, children feel very insecure. They're unsure if they're loved or cared for. They don't know what the limit is. They need parents to be the rock that they can depend on to guide them and correct them and stop them. If there are no limits, there's nothing to lean on. Spoiling a child creates so many problems for the adult that they will grow up to be. It creates entitlement, ingratitude, disrespect. It fosters a very misguided and unreal image of how things work in the world. It creates the idea that consequences don't apply to them, that they don't have to follow rules, and that other people are required to do things for them. On a deeper level, it creates an extremely insecure person who cannot trust themselves, their judgment, their skills, feelings, or ability to do anything. Someone with no frustration tolerance. It creates someone who doesn't know how to lose, fail, or make a mistake. Someone who has never been taught to consider the needs of other people or to care about them. Someone who can't fulfill their own needs or regulate their own emotions. Spoiling can create a person who has been taught that they are the only thing that actually matters, but who cannot trust themselves at all and has no confidence, not in themselves, not in the world, or in other people. This is a tragic, sad situation. When victims of childhood passive abuse like spoiling get out into the real world, they only know one way to do things, and that way is not the way the world works. This can be a terrible shock for them, and it's something they may never learn how to navigate. Even if somebody is not a narcissist, the effects of childhood passive abuse can stay with them forever. The tantrums we often see from narcissistic or otherwise spoiled adults are not just entitlement and rage. They are also often frustration and fear, because this person only knows one way to do things and no way to fulfill their own needs themselves. If somebody else won't do it, they don't know what to do. Now, this is not meant to judge those who may have indulged their children. While there are some people who spoil children in a deliberate attempt to use the children as validation or to ensure that the children love them more than the other parent, such as narcissists, many parents don't have bad intentions at all. They honestly believe they're helping. They may not even realize there's a problem until spoiling a child turns into enabling an adult. In many situations, passive abuse is unintentional. There's no intent to hurt anybody. In cases of emotional neglect, for example, it's often the case that the parent is overextended with too many children or with working. Maybe they might have an illness. It could even be a case of just a bad personality match between a parent and a child, where a parent is very reserved and a child is very needy. The parent certainly has no desire to hurt their child in this situation, and they don't realize the damage is occurring until years later. In the end, it's easy to look at the adult product of parenting and point out all the mistakes that somebody made. It's easy to assign blame. The truth is, though, once a person gets to a certain age, it becomes their own responsibility to take charge of their own evolution. If someone is 40 years old and they're still throwing tantrums or still cannot conduct themselves in an adult fashion, that's their responsibility. It's their problem. And if they refuse to take that responsibility, nobody else can teach them, fix them, or heal them. Nobody else needs to put up with that behavior either. Hopefully, the person will come to the realization that their behavior needs to change and do whatever they can do about that, because even pathologically narcissistic people can change their behavior if they need to. It is never too late, but it can be too bad. If someone doesn't want to do better, that's too bad. I hope this clears a few things up for you. As always, I look forward to your comments, questions, and suggestions, so please keep those coming. I take appointments online, over the phone, via email, via text message, and via messenger. So if you're interested in speaking with me one-on-one, you can visit littleshaman.org and click the Book an Appointment tab. I teach workshops once a month for the remainder of 2019. The current workshop I have going on right now is Creating Boundaries. So if you're interested in attending one of those, visit littleshaman.org and click the Workshops tab to go ahead and sign up for that. You've been listening to the Meditations and More podcast brought to you by littleshaman.org. That's me, Little Shaman. May the Great Spirit bless you and have a wonderful day.